High above Aspen Ridge, Montana, the wind carried more than snow, it carried secrets. When Ranger Jack Mercer and his dog Scout pulled two frozen Marines from the mountain, they unearthed proof of a cover-up buried deep in the forest. What followed tested family faith and the meaning of duty itself. Watch till the end to see how one soldier's truth changed everything. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe heroes still walk among us. The ridge carried winter the way an old hymn carries silence, carefully, reverently, with room for a voice to break and heal. Lily Mercer trudged along the narrow trail with her scarf pulled high and her mittens wet at the fingertips from brushing frost off the low branches. The storm had been muttering all morning, a hoarse threat rolling down from the Idaho line, and every so often the wind rose just enough to nudge the spruce tops into a hush. Beside her, Scout kept a veteran's pace, steady, deliberate, the way an aging Labrador moves when he knows there's a job to do and not much extra to spend on flair. His muzzle had gone salt and pepper over the last 2 winters, and his left ear never quite stood the way it used to after a foolish dash through barbed wire when Lily was in grade school. Even now he checked over his shoulder every dozen steps, reading her breath the way he read the snow. She loved the quiet out here. The crisp sound of her boots, the occasional pop of a tree settling in the cold, the faint pine-sweet smell of sap sealed under ice. It was the kind of quiet that made sense of her father's long pauses and careful words, as if the mountain taught a person to leave space where truth could land. They had set out from the ranger shed after lunch when the light was thin as shaved metal, and the clouds had flattened the sun to a pale coin in a gray pocket. 2 hours and home, Jack had said, tightening the strap on her pack, then crouching until his eyes almost the same gray-green as the pines were level with hers. If the wind shifts, turn back. No proving points on a day like this. Lily had smiled like she always did when he slipped into that half-serious voice, but she'd felt the warning settle in. Scout had nosed Jack's palm, accepted the pat between his shoulders like a benediction, and led the way out. They were a mile past the overlook when Scout's head snapped left. His tail went high, not wagging, but braced the banner of a dog who has listened through the noise and heard the single note that matters. Lily felt the change move through him like a ripple through taut fabric. "What is it, boy?" she asked, already bracing herself as he pulled the leash. He didn't bark at first. He tested the air with short, decisive breaths, then launched down the shallow bank with a force that surprised her. She slid after him, snow whispering up the legs of her jeans, the cold biting where the powder found skin. Scout barked once, sharp, slicing the quiet. Then again, louder, a call that was not for squirrels or deer, but for a human ear. The hollow was small and shaped like a cupped hand, a place wind had scoured clean before laying snow again, a place that collected what the ridge didn't want. At first, Lily could make no sense of the shapes under the drift. They were just humps with hard edges and patches of a greenish-gray fabric the color of old sage. Then she saw a patch of skin bluish at the cheek, a jaw tight with the cold's stubborn grip. A gloved hand protruded at an angle that made her stomach tighten. Scout halted at the rim, planted his front paws deep, and began to bark in a measured rhythm, 3 in a row, a pause, 3 again. The pattern Jack had trained him to use when he found somebody who couldn't answer. Lily's breath came fast and plumed in the air like lift from an invisible wing. She slid to her knees, snow stinging through her wool tights, and brushed at the white that had sealed the nearest face. The ice was thin where it crusted the eyelashes. The man's lips were chapped, parted just enough to show a line of frost at his teeth, and colorless in the way of someone far from a warm room. His collar lay under the snow where it had drifted and set. Her fingers numb already worked at the fabric until she revealed the edge of a name tape, then a small rectangular patch, black letters on subdued green. She didn't read them yet. She was counting 1, 2, waiting. There. A shallow movement in his throat, a thread of air. She forced herself to keep her voice steady. "Sir, can you hear me? You're not alone. I'm Lily. My dog's name is Scout. My dad's a ranger. He's close. She fumbled for the radio, the small handheld Jack had insisted ride in the top pocket of her pack no matter how short the walk. Her thumb found the push to talk. Ranger Station. This is Lily Mercer on the North Ridge, she said. Eyes on Scout, who had shifted from barking to a low, continuous growl aimed at the timber beyond the hollow. We have 2 males' military uniforms partially buried. One is breathing. I need my dad. Static answered for a heartbeat, the Storm's first fingers beginning to scratch at the signal. Then Jack's voice, compressed and calm and close enough to feel. Copy, Lily. Stay put. Don't move them. Check airway. Shield their faces. Scout's with you. Yes, she said, fighting the tremor. He found them. Good boy, Jack said, and she could hear the change in his breathing, the sound he made when the plan he didn't want became the plan he had. I'm 20 minutes if the river crossing holds. She did what she could. She used her scarf to block the wind where it tunneled through the hollow. She brushed snow away from the second figure whose face lay half-turned into the drift. His skin looked different, not just cold, but settled, yet she would not let herself decide anything. She rubbed her hands together until the sting felt like fire and pressed the warmth into the first man's jawline, the way Jack had taught her years ago when they watched the training team pull a volunteer out of the practice pit. She spoke quietly, almost in rhythm with Scout's breath, telling the stranger the small things a person can hold: her name, the name of the ridge, the fact that he could smell spruce because there was a stand 20 yards to his right. When the wind rose, she bent closer and let her words fill the space the cold sought. Snow started in earnest, a dry, fine fall that skated across her sleeves and gathered at the lip of the hollow. Scout shifted position, putting his body between the men and the wind, lowering himself so his warmth pooled where theirs had thinned. He continued to watch the tree line, ears lifting, then flattening, then lifting again, as if he were weighing sounds against memory. Lily followed his gaze and saw only gray woods, the trunks in their winter robes, the trail vanishing like a thought you can almost recall. Still, she felt the sensation that sometimes came on hunts with Jack, that the forest had narrowed its eyes and was paying attention. The distant thrum of a snow sled grew out of the white like a promise hammered from steel. It climbed the ridge with a persistence she recognized in her father's stride. A minute later, the machine appeared between the spruces, a red block with a windshield crowded by ice. Jack eased it to a stop short of the hollow, killed the engine, and for a second just stood in the silence. His arrival left taking in the lay of the ground, the angle of the bodies, his daughter's steadied face, and the dog he had trained to be brave without being foolish. Good work, he said as he slid down the bank. His voice had softened by a degree that told Lily where he was storing his fear. He moved like a man who had done this before, in another uniform, in other weather. He checked the airway with gentle hands, the pulse at the neck with eyes that measured without judging, then tugged the collar free of a drift that had hardened. Snow lifted in a small crumble, revealing the unit patch on the left shoulder, an American flag subdued to match, and below it an emblem, a coiled serpent and a numeral that made him still. The cold had chiseled his features into a kind of grave honesty, but something tightened at his mouth. Lily saw it and did not ask, not yet. Jack took a breath, a slow one that worked through old muscle, and touched the patch with the back of his glove, respectful as a man traces a name on a wall. This unit stood down 5 years ago, he said, not to his daughter, but to the air that remembered. Then, after a beat, to Lily. We're moving fast and careful. Keep Scout there. I'll call the clinic. Nobody saw them but us. The sky dimmed a fraction, as if the storm had leaned closer to listen. Jack keyed his radio and sent clipped information, the kind that makes other people hurry. Scout's growl faded by degrees until it became mere breath, but his eyes never left the trees. Lily slipped her hand to his collar and felt the old, steady engine of him, the heartbeat that had counted so many days of their lives. In that moment, with the patch glinting dully and the wind prying at the edges of their small circle of warmth, She understood without words that whatever this was, it began before the snow, and that it would pull at the threads of things her father kept folded and quiet. She tightened her grip and glanced at him. Jack met her look with a small nod. "We will carry this, and we will not set it down in the wrong place." The sled's engine coughed back to life. The ridge drew a breath. The day tilted into a new shape. The wind came down the ridge like a whip made of cold. Jack had seen storms like this before during his years in the Marines, but the way the snow moved now, erratic, almost desperate, made the woods feel alive and unwilling to share their secrets. He knelt beside the unconscious Marine whose pulse fluttered like a trapped bird under his glove. Lily was quiet, focused, holding the flashlight steady, her breath coming out in fast, white clouds. "We have to move him soon," she said. Jack nodded once. "We will, but slow. He's got a shoulder injury. We need to preserve body heat first." He looked at Scout, who stood over the man, tail-stiff eyes, searching Jack's face for instruction. "Down," Jack said softly. "Stay." The old Labrador understood instantly. He eased himself onto the man's chest, curling his heavy frame over the torso to share warmth, his breath fogging in steady rhythm. Lily watched, surprised, as the color in the Marine's face shifted faintly from blue to gray. Jack pressed his hand to the man's cheek. There was movement now, faint but there. "Good work, Scout." Jack murmured a note of relief, cutting through the storm's moan. He pulled an emergency blanket from his pack and draped it over both the man and the dog, tucking it around their shoulders. Lily wrapped another blanket around the second body, though Jack knew by the weight and stillness that one would not be waking. The sled's small heater hummed, and Jack motioned for Lily to help. Together they lifted the breathing Marine onto the sled's rescue board. Jack handled him like something fragile, scanning for hidden wounds. The man's name patch was half torn, the letters CAR visible before the fabric gave out. Carter Jack read quietly. "Corporal, maybe." He secured the straps and adjusted Scout's position at the man's side. The dog's warmth pressed against the soldier's arm. "Hold him steady," Jack told Lily. "He's in shock." The sled lurched forward, carving through the drifts as Jack drove down the narrow trail toward the ranger station. The engine's growl was swallowed by the wind. Lily sat in the rear compartment beside Scout and the injured Marine. She could feel every vibration of the machine, every bump of hidden rock under the snow. The Marine's head rolled slightly. His eyelids twitched. "He's dreaming," she said, and Scout lifted his head, watching the man's face as if reading his mind. Then a whisper barely audible through the wind. "We weren't the first." Lily leaned closer. "What did you say?" The Marine's lips parted again, cracked and white. "Not the first," he breathed. Then his eyes rolled back and he went still again. Lily's pulse quickened. She pressed her gloved hand to his chest. "He's still breathing, Dad," she shouted. Jack glanced back, eyes narrowing. "Keep him talking if he wakes again," he said, steering through a turn that sprayed ice against the sled's windshield. The ride stretched into a tunnel of noise and light. When they reached the station, the storm had already begun to close behind them, swallowing their tracks. Jack and Lily moved quickly, hauling the stretcher inside the door, banging shut against the wind. The ranger station was a squat wooden cabin smelling of oil coffee and the faint trace of pine smoke. Jack cleared the table near the heater and laid the Marine there, cutting through layers of frozen fabric with a utility knife. His body was a map of bruises and frostbite. "Get the medical kit," Jack said. Lily handed him the silver case, her hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. Scout paced in a tight circle, whining softly until Jack gave a low whistle that sent him to lie by the door. Jack checked the man's pupils with a penlight, then the pulse again. Stable for now. He peeled back the outer glove on the Marine's right hand to check circulation, and froze. The soldier's fingers were clenched tight around something hard and metallic. "Lily, bring that towel." He worked gently until the object came free, wrapped it in the towel, and unrolled the cloth slowly. His breath caught. In his palm lay a military ID tag, stainless steel, worn dull by time, the letters stamped clear under the grime. Mercer, Jack L. The room felt smaller, suddenly, the air thick. Lily looked up from the kettle she'd just placed on the heater. "Dad, what is it?" Jack turned the tag over, checking the serial. It matched his own. "This was mine," he said quietly. "Lost it in Afghanistan 10 years ago." Lily frowned. "How could he have it?" Jack's voice dropped lower. "That's what I need to find out." He set the tag aside, wiped his hand across his jaw, and turned back to his patient. The Marine's breathing had steadied into a shallow rhythm. Jack adjusted the heat lamp closer, watching the frost melt from the man's collar. The insignia there, the subdued eagle and anchor, was regulation, but the stitching looked newly done, not aged. Something about it bothered him. He'd spent enough years in uniform to spot when a patch didn't belong. "Lily, look at this," he said. "This is the same unit as the other man, the one up the ridge. But that unit was dissolved in 2016. Nobody wears this anymore." Lily stared at the patch, then at her father. "Maybe they're reserves." Jack shook his head. "No, these aren't reserves. They're ghosts wearing old names." Scout raised his head at the sound of approaching wind against the shutters. Jack moved to check the windows. Snow hammered the glass, but beyond the blur he thought he saw movement, a flash of shadow, maybe just a trick of the light. He pushed the curtain back anyway. Nothing but white. He told himself the cold could play with a man's eyes. "Lock the back door," he said. Lily obeyed without question. She had learned long ago that when his voice took on that quiet firmness, it was not fear speaking, but experience. When the kettle whistled, Lily poured warm water into a mug and handed it to her father. Jack soaked a cloth and began to clean the dried blood from the Marine's forehead. The man stirred, opened his eyes halfway, and winced at the light. "Easy, soldier." Jack set his tone both commanding and kind. "You're safe for now. You're at a ranger station near the border. Do you remember your name?" The man's gaze flickered, confused. "Carter," he whispered. Jack nodded. "You're going to be all right, Corporal Carter. We'll get you to medical help as soon as the storm passes." Carter's hand twitched toward his chest as if searching for something. Jack caught the motion. "You were holding my ID," he said, not as accusation, but as a question. Carter's lips moved, but no sound came. Then his eyes closed again, the effort too great. Jack sat back, his expression unreadable. He felt Lily watching him, waiting for assurance he didn't yet have. "Get Scout's blanket," he said finally. "Let's make sure Carter stays warm. The rest can wait until morning." Lily spread the thick wool across the Marine's legs. Scout got up and settled at his side again. His body curved protectively against the man. Jack watched for a moment, the old dog's eyes half closed, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the soldiers. There was something ancient about the sight, the simple instinct of life, keeping life. Outside, the wind shifted, changing pitch the way it does when pressure drops fast. Jack glanced at the barometer by the door. The needle had fallen hard. Another front coming. He stepped out onto the porch for a breath of the frozen air, letting the cold sharpen his thoughts. Somewhere up there in the storm lay one dead Marine, one half-conscious survivor with a ghost unit patch and a dog tag that should have been buried under 10 years of sand and memory. It didn't add up, and he hated puzzles that began with silence. He looked back through the window. Lily sat beside Scout, her hand resting on the dog's back. The warmth between them seemed to push the shadows away from the corners of the room. He shut the door, latched it, and turned off the outside light. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. The mountain had given them 2 men from nowhere, and Jack Mercer intended to find out who had sent them into his woods, and why one of them had carried a piece of his past back out. The morning broke without color, the kind of pale light that seems to come from the snow itself rather than the sky. Jack Mercer had slept only in pieces, drifting in and out of dreams that were too sharp to be restful. When he opened his eyes, the room was filled with the quiet breathing of three souls. Lily curled in the armchair with a blanket around her shoulders, Scout lying near the stove, and the Marine Carter still unconscious but alive. The storm had dulled to a slow, whispering wind that brushed against the shutters like fingers testing a locked door. Jack rose, poured cold coffee into a tin cup, and stepped outside. The world was layered in white, the snow deep and clean except for the narrow track his sled had carved last night. He pulled his radio from his jacket pocket, keyed the main frequency, and began dictating a preliminary report. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "Ranger Station 12, this is Mercer. We have one confirmed deceased male military uniform, and one survivor, possibly U.S. Marine Corps, identified as Corporal Nate Carter. Requesting military verification and medevac when weather allows." Static hissed in reply, then broke into a faint voice. "Copy, Ranger Mercer. Stand by." He waited for the next transmission, watching his breath dissolve in the cold air. Instead, the radio crackled again, and another voice came through, one he hadn't heard in years. Jack, it said, smooth, deep, and unmistakably in command. "This is Colonel Warren Briggs." Jack froze. "Sir," he answered, cautious. "I didn't expect this to reach you directly." Briggs's tone carried the calm authority that once filled entire rooms. "I was notified of your transmission. Listen carefully. You are to withhold this report from official channels. Do not log it. Do not speak of it outside your immediate circle." Jack frowned, scanning the tree line as if the man might appear there. "Colonel, with respect, I have 2 Marines on my table. One dead, one half frozen. This isn't something I can hide in a drawer." Briggs's voice softened the way men speak when they are laying a trap gently. "I understand, son, but this incident touches ongoing operations, classified ones. There are eyes on you that don't belong to either of us. The safest course is silence until I contact you again." Jack felt the old reflex rise in him, the habit of following orders even when logic pushed back. "At least tell me what unit they're from," he said. "The insignia's been out of use for 5 years." A long pause followed, filled only by the hum of the radio's channel. "Let it go," Jack Briggs said finally. "For your sake and your daughter's. You've done enough for one night." Then the line went dead. Jack stood there for a moment, the wind moving around him in slow, deliberate swirls. His grip tightened on the radio until the edges pressed into his palm. Something in Briggs's tone carried both warning and regret, and he couldn't tell which one was meant for him. He returned inside, setting the radio on the table beside Carter's stretcher. Lily stirred, rubbing her eyes. Was that command, she asked, her voice still thick with sleep? "Something like that," Jack said. "They told us to hold off reporting until they can confirm." She frowned, not liking the answer, but too tired to argue. Scout lifted his head, eyes following Jack as he paced to the window. The snow was falling again, soft now, almost gentle, as if the storm wanted to erase their tracks a second time. The day moved slowly. Jack boiled water for coffee, checked Carter's vitals, and marked the coordinates of the discovery site on his map. Lily insisted on taking over the watch so he could rest, but he couldn't bring himself to close his eyes. Every time he looked at the dog tag on the shelf, he felt the ground shift a little more under him. 10 years was a long time for something to crawl out of the past. Around noon, Carter stirred and opened his eyes again, confusion clouding them. Jack leaned in. "You're safe, Corporal. Just rest." The Marine's lips moved as if forming a name. "Briggs," he whispered. Jack froze, but before he could ask, the man drifted back into unconsciousness. By dusk, the temperature had dropped hard. The cabin's wood stove glowed red, casting a circle of warmth and shadow that flickered against the walls. Lily sat at the desk, flipping through the ranger station's radio log, frowning at the timestamps. "Dad?" she said quietly. "There's something off with the transmission history. Look at this." She pointed to the screen of the small monitoring unit beside the antenna console. "Someone accessed our frequency last night between midnight and 1. The line was open for 5 minutes before your report this morning." Jack came over squinting at the green digital display. "Could be interference from the storm. Maybe Lily said, but the signal was encrypted. It shows a pulse pattern like a coded broadcast." Jack looked at her, seeing the blend of curiosity and worry in her expression. "You're saying someone was listening?" She nodded. "Not just listening. Broadcasting too on a military band. Same one you used when you called for help." Scout began to growl low in his throat, staring toward the antenna outside the window. The sound wasn't angry. It was a deep, instinctive warning, the kind he used when something invisible moved close. Jack reached for his jacket, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. The wind had eased, leaving a strange stillness that felt heavier than noise. He walked to the radio tower behind the cabin, its steel frame coated with ice. The LED on the relay box blinked faintly, once, twice, pause, repeat. It wasn't supposed to be active unless someone keyed the mic. Jack touched the casing. It was warm. Lily cut the power to the tower, he called. She flipped the switch inside and the light died. Jack stood there listening to the forest breathe. He had spent years in terrain like this, learning to tell the difference between a harmless sound and the kind that meant someone was counting your steps. Tonight, every creak and whisper of snow on bark sounded deliberate. He looked toward the ridge where they'd found the Marines. Beyond that, nothing but miles of white and quiet. Still, his gut told him they weren't alone. He walked back inside, closing the door carefully. "What did you see?" Lily asked. "Nothing," Jack said, hanging his coat, "and that's what worries me." He checked the time. Almost 2100 hours. The power flickered once, then steadied. The generator outside coughed and resumed its steady thrum. Scout returned to the window, pressing his nose to the glass. His tail was stiff eyes, fixed on the dark shape of the antenna silhouetted against the snow. Jack knelt beside him, rubbing the fur behind his ears. "Easy, boy," he whispered. But Scout didn't relax. The hair along his spine stood up and his gaze tracked something beyond the range of human sight. Jack rose and looked at Lily. "Tomorrow we'll head to the outpost and check the ridge again," he said. "If there's a transmitter out there, I'll find it." Lily hesitated, then nodded. "You think those men were part of something bigger, don't you?" she asked. Jack didn't answer right away. He poured water into the kettle, his movements slow, thoughtful. "In my experience," he said finally, "nothing like this happens in isolation. Someone wanted them found, or someone wanted them buried. Either way, they didn't expect Scout to start digging." Outside the forest was a wash of moonlight and shifting snow. Somewhere up the valley, a low hum rose for a moment, an engine distant and fading. Jack looked toward the sound, every sense alert. It faded before he could place it. He turned down the lantern and set his rifle beside the door. When he looked at Lily and Scout, both watching him in quiet trust, he felt the weight of command settle back onto his shoulders, the same weight he thought he'd left behind with his uniform. The mountain had called him once more, and this time it wasn't for rescue, it was for reckoning. The night deepened into that uneasy stillness that comes after a storm when the world has not yet decided whether to rest or to wake. Inside the ranger cabin, the stove pulsed with a low orange glow, and Scout lay curled beside the cot where Corporal Nate Carter had been sleeping. The soft tick of melting ice from the eaves counted time like a distant metronome. Jack Mercer sat at the table writing in a small field notebook by lamplight, recording details, the time of discovery, the condition of the survivors, coordinates of the ridge. His handwriting was steady but deliberate, each line an act of control against the chaos that lurked just outside the walls. Lily dozed on the couch, her head resting on a rolled-up jacket while Scout's tail flicked occasionally against the floor in small rhythmic motions, a signal that he wasn't entirely asleep. The peace lasted until Carter stirred. At first it was a small movement, a hand twitching under the blanket, but then his breathing quickened, his head turning sharply from side to side as if chasing the echoes of some nightmare. Jack rose and crossed the room. "Easy, son," he said gently. "You're safe here." Carter's eyes snapped open, pupils wide, unfocused. He gasped once, then his voice broke into a raw, terrified shout. "Get away from me! They sent you, didn't they? To finish it!" His hand shot to his side, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. Jack instinctively stepped back, hands raised. "Nobody sent me," he said. "You're at a ranger station, not a field camp. You're safe." But Carter's panic had taken hold. He lurched halfway up from the cot, his face pale with confusion, eyes darting between Jack and the shadows behind him. Scout exploded into motion. With a deep bark that filled the cabin like thunder, he bounded between them. His body angled toward Carter, but not attacking, just a living wall of muscle and breath. His growl was low, measured, the kind that vibrated through the air without spilling into violence. Lily jerked awake, sitting upright as the scene unfolded. "Dad," she cried. Jack kept his voice calm but firm. "Scout, stay." The dog obeyed instantly, holding position, his gaze locked on the trembling Marine. For a tense moment, the room held its breath. Then Carter's expression changed. His eyes dropped to the dog's tags, the faint glint of the old brass nameplate that read, "Scout, Mercer Family." His shoulders slumped, and the fight drained out of him. "He's protecting you," Carter whispered, as if the realization itself were a kind of salvation. Jack lowered his hands. "Protecting all of us," he said softly. Carter's chest heaved as the panic receded. He sank back onto the cot, the weight of exhaustion overtaking the terror. Jack checked his pulse again, slower now, and motioned Lily to bring water. She handed him a cup, her fingers trembling slightly. "What was he talking about?" she asked in a whisper. Jack shook his head. "He's been through something bad. Maybe he thought I was one of them." One of who Lily pressed, but Jack didn't answer. He handed the cup to Carter, who drank shakily, eyes unfocused, but no longer wild. When the Marine finally drifted back to sleep, Scout stretched beside the cot, his breathing steady, watchful, even in rest. The clock over the stove read nearly midnight when Jack finally stepped outside to check the generator. The sky was clear for the first time in days, the stars sharp and unblinking, their cold light spilling over the snow like spilled glass. The air was brittle, each breath cutting as it left his throat. He circled the cabin, flashlight in hand, scanning for new tracks. The snow from the storm should have erased everything older than a few hours, but near the shed, he noticed a trail of faint impressions that didn't belong to Scout or himself. They were lighter, narrower, as if made by someone moving quickly and carefully. He crouched and touched the nearest print. It was fresh enough that the edges hadn't yet crusted. Behind him, Scout gave a sudden bark from inside the cabin. Jack turned sharply, beam slicing through the dark, and saw Lily at the door. "Dad, Scout smells something," she called, her voice tight. Jack motioned for her to stay inside, then opened the shed. The hinges creaked softly, revealing stacks of fuel drums, a snow sled, and the faint metallic scent of oil. Then he saw it just at the threshold, a dark stain glistening faintly under the beam. Blood. Thin and fresh, a trail leading away toward the tree line. His first thought was that one of the injured Marines had wandered out, but Carter was still inside. So who had bled here? He whistled once low. Scout bounded out, nose to the ground immediately. The dog followed the scent, unerringly moving in slow arcs through the snow, tail rigid. Jack followed, flashlight sweeping the woods, heart tightening as they descended a small slope toward the old fuel depot, an outpost from the logging days long abandoned but still standing. The trail of blood grew more distinct drops, becoming smears, then fading again where the snow had drifted. Halfway there, Scout stopped, ears perked, body taut as a drawn bow. Jack killed the light and listened. The forest was whispering again, wind brushing through pines. But beneath it there was another sound, a faint crunch of boots over snow, careful, deliberate, close. He signaled Scout to stay low and took a step forward. The shadow moved between two trees ahead, slender, fast, almost silent. The beam of Jack's flashlight caught the briefest reflection, a patch of flannel, the curve of a familiar shoulder, the shape of a face he hadn't seen in over a year. Ray Jack's voice cracked against the silence. The figure froze. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then the man turned his head, and Jack saw enough the unmistakable outline of his younger brother before he vanished into the dark. Ray Jack shouted again, but the only answer was the fading rustle of branches and Scout's sharp bark echoing through the trees. Lily's voice came faintly from the cabin. "Dad, what is it?" Jack lowered the flashlight, his hand tightening around it. "Someone's out here," he said quietly, though she couldn't hear him. The name lingered on his tongue like a secret he wasn't ready to own. He followed the tracks for a few yards, but they disappeared where the wind had scoured the ground clean. When he finally turned back, Scout trotted beside him, looking up with a questioning whine. "I saw him, boy," Jack murmured. "I saw Ray." The dog's ears flicked and he pressed close as they climbed back toward the cabin. Inside, the warmth felt heavier, as if the air itself had learned something it didn't want to keep. Lily stood by the door, worry etched across her face. "You're pale," she said. Jack nodded absently, brushing snow from his jacket. "There's blood near the shed," he said, "and tracks heading toward the depot. Someone's been watching us." Lily's eyes widened. Could it be the people who hurt Carter? Jack met her gaze and hesitated before answering. Maybe. Or maybe someone closer. Scout padded to the window and sat ears forward, watching the tree line as if expecting it to move again. Jack turned off the lanterns one by one until only the fire remained flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. "We'll check the depot at first light," he said quietly. "Whoever's out there knows this place better than I thought." He looked once more at the dog tag on the shelf, then at Scout, who hadn't stopped staring into the night. The mountain had begun to whisper names again, old names, ones Jack thought he'd buried. The morning came gray and bitter, the kind that stripped color from everything it touched. Frost laced the windows of the ranger cabin, turning the world beyond into a blur of white shapes and dark trunks. Jack Mercer stood by the door with his rifle slung and his breath steaming in the cold air that slipped through the cracks. He had not slept since seeing the shadow in the woods, and the memory of his brother's face, half hidden, half certain, played over and over in his mind. Lily stood behind him, still wrapped in her coat. "You're really going after him?" she asked softly. Jack nodded. "If Ray's out there, I need to know why." Scout stood already waiting, tail still nose-pointed toward the ridge. "Stay with Corporal Carter," Jack told her. "Keep the radio on Channel 3. If anything moves near the cabin, you lock the door and call me." Lily hesitated, then handed him a small flashlight. "Be careful," she said. Jack touched her shoulder briefly. "Always." He stepped into the morning, the snow crunching under his boots, the air sharp enough to cut. The tracks from the night before had nearly vanished, blurred by drifting powder, but Scout found the trail without hesitation. The dog moved low to the ground, following scent more than sight, leading Jack deeper into the woods toward the northern ridge. The forest was silent, except for the creak of distant branches. It was the kind of silence that held its breath. Scout paused once, sniffing the air, then pushed forward through a thicket of young pines until the trees opened onto a clearing. There, tucked against a slope, stood an old logging shack, its roof sagging boards gray and splintered smoke seeping faintly from a broken chimney. Jack's pulse tightened. He raised the rifle but kept the barrel low as he approached. Scout let out a low whine and stopped 10 yards short of the door. Jack whispered, "Stay," and mounted the steps. The door gave way with a slow groan. Inside, the air smelled of oil, damp wood, and something faintly metallic. A single lantern burned on a crate, casting shadows across the walls. And there, sitting on an overturned bucket, was Ray Mercer. His hair had gone thinner than Jack remembered, and the lines around his eyes were deeper, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The same square jaw, the same way of holding his shoulders, as if ready to take a blow. Ray looked up slowly, and whatever defiance he might have had dissolved into weariness. "You always were good at finding things," he said quietly. Jack lowered the rifle, but didn't sling it away. "You were near the cabin last night," he said. "Why?" Ray rubbed a hand over his face. "To make sure you were still breathing." "That's not an answer," Jack replied. Ray sighed. "All right. You want the truth? I've been working with a company called Iron Veil Security. They contract for the Department of Defense cleanup logistics, things no one wants to see on paper." Jack's jaw tightened. Cleanup of what old ammunition, Ray said. Faulty rounds, defective explosives, things that shouldn't go back to a warehouse. We were supposed to dispose of them quietly off the books. The forest was empty land, Jack. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. Jack took a step closer. "So you're burying weapons in a national park?" "Not weapons," Ray said quickly. "Scrap waste shells without powder. At least that's what they told us." His voice faltered on the last word. Scout moved to the threshold, sniffing uneasy. "You think Iron Veil's dumping live ordnance?" Jack said flatly. Ray didn't answer right away. He stared at the floorboards where oil stains had darkened the wood. "I started to suspect a few months ago. We were moving sealed crates out of an old depot west of Helena. The manifests didn't match the cargo. When I opened one crate, just one, it wasn't empty shells. It was identification tags. Marines, some still covered in sand." Jack felt the air leave his lungs. "Dog tags. From where, Afghanistan?" "Syria. Places we shouldn't have been anymore," Ray said. "They told me it was evidence from closed cases. But when I asked for paperwork, they shut me out." His hands trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Look at this." Jack unfolded it. It was a work order stamped with Iron Veil's insignia authorizing disposal of defective munitions, Sector 19A. The coordinates were the same as the ridge where Jack had found the Marines. Before Jack could speak, Scout barked sharply and bolted toward the side of the shack. Jack followed, stepping into the clearing where the dog was already digging at a patch of sunken snow near the base of a spruce. The ground there was different, softer, darker, as if something beneath had begun to thaw. "What is it, boy?" Jack asked, kneeling. Scout kept digging paws, sending up sprays of cold earth until his claws struck metal with a dull clank. Jack brushed away the snow, revealing a shallow depression lined with disturbed soil. Inside it lay a small rusted tin box. He pried it open carefully. Inside, half buried in dirt, were fragments of a dog tag chain and a single tag smeared with dried blood. The engraving was faint, but still legible. The name wasn't one Jack recognized, but the unit number etched below matched the same Ghost Division stitched on Corporal Carter's uniform. Ray sank to his knees beside him, staring at the tag. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "I thought it was just junk metal. They told us we were helping clean up, making room for new operations. But this is murder buried under snow." His voice cracked, and for a moment he looked younger the way he had the day their father died, standing by the folded flag that neither of them could look at for long. "They killed their own Jack," he whispered. I thought it was just cargo. Jack closed the tin box and held it in his gloved hands. Who's they? He asked quietly. Name's Ray. I need names. Ray shook his head, wiping his eyes. I don't have them all. But the man who signs off on our jobs, he's military high up. He answers directly to Briggs. The name landed between them like a hammer blow. Jack stared at his brother, disbelief giving way to grim recognition. Briggs, he repeated. You're saying the colonel's involved in this? Ray nodded. He funds Iron Veil through shell contracts. I saw his signature on the payroll. He's been using us to cover their mistakes, dumping evidence before audits catch up. Jack stood slowly, the weight of the discovery pressing on his chest. You should have come to me, he said. Ray laughed without humor. You think I didn't try? I left messages. You stopped answering your phone. Remember? I thought you wanted nothing more to do with the Marines or with me. Jack looked away, guilt flickering behind his eyes. That was before I knew you were burying ghosts. Scout whined softly, pressing his head against Jack's hand. The contact grounded him. He looked back at Ray. This ends now, Jack said. You'll come with me to the station. We'll call the feds and we'll make sure this doesn't disappear like everything else. Ray's expression tightened. If Briggs finds out I talked, I'm dead. If you stay silent, more will die, Jack said. Choose. For a long moment, Ray didn't move. Then he nodded once, defeated. All right, he whispered. But you'd better be ready for what's coming. They walked back toward the cabin with Scout leading the way nose low to the snow. The sun had dipped behind the ridge, leaving the forest bathed in blue twilight. Jack carried the tin box under his arm, its weight more than metal. He glanced at his brother, who moved like a man carrying his own shadow. Ahead, Scout stopped suddenly, ears lifting toward the distant tree line where faint engine noise rolled through the valley. Jack listened, recognizing the low rumble of heavy trucks. They weren't alone anymore. The day had the gray heaviness of metal left too long in the cold. Clouds hung low over the valley, pressing against the peaks, as if the sky itself wanted to smother the ridge. Jack Mercer returned to the ranger cabin with Ray trailing behind him, their breath streaming white in the air. Scout trotted ahead, glancing back every few yards to make sure they followed. When Jack opened the door, the warmth inside hit him like a wave. Lily looked up from the radio, her eyes wide with relief. You found him, she said. Ray managed a small nod before sinking onto the bench by the stove. Corporal Nate Carter lay on the cot, awake now, but pale, the weight of exhaustion still on him. His gaze flicked from Jack to Ray, suspicion etched deep in his face. Jack closed the door and leaned his rifle by the wall. Carter, he said, keeping his voice calm. We need to talk. Carter hesitated, then nodded weakly. Jack sat across from him. You were part of a Marine unit, same division we found on the ridge. Tell me what you were doing out here. Carter took a slow breath, his fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. We weren't on regular assignment, he said. Our orders came straight from the Pentagon Special Investigations Command. They'd been getting reports about a private contractor moving restricted materials through federal land. Iron Veil Security. Ray flinched slightly at the name but said nothing. Carter went on. Our mission was to collect proof. Not rumors, not whispers. Actual evidence of illegal disposal. We were supposed to meet a federal liaison at the drop point 2 days before the storm. Jack leaned forward. What happened? Carter's jaw tightened. We got there early. The site was quiet, too quiet. Then the radio went dead. We thought it was weather. 10 minutes later, the first truck rolled in Iron Veil insignia on the side. We moved into cover, expecting a pickup team. Instead, they started unloading crates into the clearing and setting up portable incinerators. He paused, swallowing hard. That's when we realized this wasn't disposal. It was a burn order. They were erasing something paperwork hardware evidence, and we were the witnesses they didn't expect. Ray looked down at his hands, the guilt visible in the tremor of his fingers. Jack's voice was steady but carried an edge. "How did they find you?" Carter's eyes lifted hollow and angry. "Someone inside sold us out. We used encrypted channels cleared through defense. That means the leak came from high up. One of our own." He coughed, wincing from the effort. "They hit us fast, no insignia but military formation. Clean tactics, quiet weapons. We went down before we could transmit." He looked directly at Jack. "They left us alive long enough to freeze. Someone wanted our deaths to look like the mountain's fault." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the stove. Lily sat back slowly, her eyes darting between her father and the soldier. "So the army's hiding it?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "Not the army," he said. "A man inside it. Colonel Briggs." Ray's shoulders stiffened and Carter's expression darkened. "You know that name?" Carter asked. "I do," Jack replied. "He was my CO before I left the service. He called me this morning, told me to keep quiet. Said someone was watching." "He's right," Carter muttered. "And it's probably him doing the watching." Scout lifted his head, suddenly ears pricking toward the window. His growl was low but steady. Jack's instincts flared immediately. He crossed to the window and pulled the curtain aside a fraction. "Something out there?" Lily asked. "He hears what we can't," Jack murmured. Scout moved to the door body tense. Then came the faint, rhythmic pulse of light, 2 flashes, pause 1 flash, cutting through the trees from the north ridge. Jack reached for his binoculars, stepped onto the porch, and scanned the valley. Far off in the distance, faint against the snow, a line of headlights wound slowly up the access road. He focused the lenses, adjusting the dial until the shapes sharpened. 3 vehicles, large, reinforced transport trucks, each bearing a circular insignia on the doors. Even from this distance, the black and silver Iron Veil emblem was unmistakable. His breath caught as he saw what followed behind them, a smaller vehicle box, like its roof, fitted with chimneys that released thin trails of smoke even as it moved. A mobile incinerator. "They're coming here," Jack said under his breath. He went back inside quickly. "We've got company," he said. "Iron Veil trucks. They're on the old service road." Carter tried to rise but winced as pain shot through his ribs. "They're not here to negotiate," he said. "They're cleaning house." Jack grabbed his rifle and checked the magazine. "How many men do they usually send on these runs?" "At least a dozen," Ray answered quietly. "Enough to finish the job fast." "Then we don't wait for them to get close," Jack said. He turned to Lily. "Radio the Forest Service any channel that still works. Tell them we have armed intruders approaching federal land." Lily rushed to the radio console and keyed the mic, but static hissed back the same hollow crackle that filled the room like breath through teeth. "No signal," she said. "The frequency's jammed." Scout barked once, sharp and warning. Jack moved to the back window. The glow of headlights grew brighter now, reflecting off the snow in wide, sweeping arcs. The trucks were still a mile away, but their engines carried through the cold like drums. He turned to Carter. "Can you move?" "Enough," Carter said, pulling himself upright with effort. "If they find us, they'll kill everyone. That's protocol for a compromised site." Jack's jaw set. "Not tonight." Ray stood his voice low. "Jack, they're burning everything. They'll torch the whole ridge to make it look like a forest fire." Jack looked at his brother, the lantern light cutting lines across his face. "You're sure?" Ray nodded. "That's what the mobile units are for. They call it scorched reclamation. It erases the evidence and anyone who's near it." Lily's voice trembled. "We can't outrun trucks in the snow." "We're not running," Jack said. "We're moving uphill to the old fire tower. If we get high enough, we can see them coming and stay out of reach." He grabbed a pack from the wall and began filling it with essentials maps, ammo medical kit the tin box they had found. Ray helped Carter. Lily get Scout's harness. Scout wagged his tail once as if understanding that the next few hours would decide everything. Within minutes they were outside, the cold slicing across their faces. The moon hid behind the clouds, leaving only the white reflection of snow to guide them. Behind them, the distant engines roared louder, steady and deliberate. Jack looked back one last time at the cabin, the faint glow of the stove flickering through the frosted glass. It had been home, a sanctuary. Now it was a beacon for whoever was coming. "Move," he said quietly. They started up the slope, Scout leading through the powder, his paws sinking deep but sure. Every so often he looked back, ears twitching to sounds only he could hear. Halfway up, Jack stopped and raised the binoculars again. The trucks had reached the valley floor now, lights cutting broad swaths across the trees. In the harsh glare, he could see the Iron Veil symbol, clearly the black circle surrounding a white anvil. Behind the lead truck, the smaller incinerator unit rolled steadily, its chimneys now releasing thicker smoke. He realized then that the vehicles weren't carrying supplies at all. They were carrying an order: erase everything. Jack lowered the binoculars slowly, the wind tugging at his coat. "They're not here for cargo," he said. "They're here for us." Scout growled low in agreement. Ray looked back down the mountain, eyes wide, as the first glow from the convoy painted the snow in dull orange light. "Then we'd better stay one step ahead," he whispered. And together they climbed, leaving the cabin and its fragile warmth behind as the fire under ice drew closer from the valley below. The forest had turned black as coal against the night sky, the snow reflecting the faint silver of the hidden moon. Jack Mercer led the way up the ridge, each step sinking deep, his breath coming hard but steady. Behind him, Lily supported Corporal Carter, who limped but refused to slow down. Ray followed close, his face pale under the dim light. Scout moved ahead like a living compass tail, rigid, head low, weaving through the pines with uncanny precision. The hum of engines below had grown faint, replaced by the soft hiss of snow falling from branches disturbed by the wind. They reached the upper clearing beneath the old fire tower, a skeletal structure rising above the trees like a sentry from another era. Jack raised his hand to stop the group. "This is as high as we can go without being seen," he said in a low voice. Carter nodded and dropped to one knee, scanning the slope below with a pair of thermal binoculars. "3 trucks confirmed," he said. 2 heavy transports, 1 mobile burner. They'll reach the cabin in 10 minutes. Jack's mind raced. "We can't let them torch the ridge," he said. "The whole forest will go up. We have to block them before they hit the clearing." Ray stepped forward, his eyes uncertain but resolute. "I can help," he said. "There's an old maintenance road that crosses the valley to the east. It's narrow, too steep for those trucks. If we jam the lead vehicle there, the others will have to stop or risk rolling into the ravine." Jack hesitated, studying his brother. "You'd have to guide us there through the dark." Ray nodded. "I know every turn. We used it for supply runs when Iron Veil started burying cargo." Jack's jaw tightened. "You'll take point then. Carter, you're with me. Lily, stay here with Scout." "Dad, I'm not—" "That's not up for debate," he said gently but firm. "Keep the radio on. If anything moves up this slope, Scout will know before we do." Scout turned his head toward Lily, letting out a quiet whine as if understanding the separation. Lily knelt, pressing her forehead briefly against his. "Find them if they don't come back," she whispered. Within minutes, Jack, Ray, and Carter were descending through the timberline, their boots muffled by snow. The forest was a maze of shadows and whispering branches. Scout stayed behind for only a moment before breaking orders. He circled wide through the dark, trailing them unseen, his instincts overriding command. The men moved silently, guided by Ray's memory and the faint glow of the valley lights below. "It's just ahead," Ray murmured, pointing to where the trees thinned into a narrow cut of road carved into the mountainside. Jack crouched, raising his hand in signal. Carter unpacked a small case of flares from his kit. "We could set a diversion," he whispered. "If we draw them off the road, it'll buy time." Ray nodded. "There's an old utility trench just beyond that bend. It leads straight to the ridge, perfect cover." Then Scout appeared out of the darkness, silent as smoke, his eyes reflecting faint light. Jack frowned. "I told him to stay," he muttered. The dog gave a short, low bark, then trotted ahead toward the trench. Jack followed him with his eyes, realizing what Scout was doing, scouting the path, testing the air. Moments later, Scout returned, barked twice, and moved to the right, indicating another route. "He's saying, 'Not that way,'" Ray whispered. Jack trusted the dog's instincts more than maps. They veered off the direct trail, circling wide around a cluster of pines. Minutes later, through the trees, they saw it, a 4-man patrol from Ironvale moving up the slope, flashlights off, rifles ready. Had they taken the trench, they would have walked straight into them. Jack felt a pulse of quiet gratitude. "Good work, boy," he murmured. Scout's ears flicked in acknowledgement. When the patrol passed, they resumed their descent. The road came into view at last, a narrow curve of packed ice clinging to the mountain's edge. Jack crouched behind a fallen log and scanned the valley below. The first of the Ironvale trucks was approaching. Headlights dimmed the black emblem, glinting faintly on its side. "We'll need to block the pass right there," Ray said, pointing to a choke point where the road narrowed. "If we can drop a tree across, it'll stall them long enough." Jack nodded. Together they set to work using their tools to weaken the trunk of a dead spruce. The wood cracked softly, the sound swallowed by the wind. Carter braced himself against the trunk, ready to push. "On 3, Jack whispered. 1, 2. Before he could finish, a distant shout echoed from the woods below. Ray's face went pale. "They've split the convoy. A second team's flanking through the ravine." Jack swore under his breath. "We're out of time. Push it now." The tree gave way, crashing across the road with a muffled thud of snow. The first truck braked, hard tires skidding. Shouts rang out as lights flared. "Move!" Jack hissed. They scrambled for cover along the ridge. Scout barked once loud and sharp, then vanished into the trees. The Ironvale soldiers fanned out flashlights, cutting the darkness. Jack held his breath as one beam swept dangerously close. Then, from deeper in the woods, came another bark, 2 short, 1 long, the pattern Scout used when signaling safe route. Jack motioned to Carter and Ray. "This way." They slipped into the trees, following the sound. Scout guided them through a narrow cut between rocks, across a frozen stream, and up toward higher ground. By the time they reached the ridge again, the trucks were halted below soldiers milling in confusion. But victory was short-lived. Jack turned to Ray, only to find his brother gone. He looked back and saw far down the slope 2 Ironvale men dragging someone toward the lead truck. Ray's jacket glinted faintly in the light. Jack started forward, but Carter caught his arm. "It's a trap," he warned. Jack's heart pounded, torn between instinct and reason. Then something tumbled from the struggle, a small black object that hit the snow and rolled toward a boulder. A satellite phone. Jack motioned for Carter to stay down and crawled to it. The line was still open. A voice crackled through, crisp and cold as a blade. "This is Colonel Briggs," it said. "Report." A second voice answered, muffled by static. "We have the target, sir." The others escaped into the ridge. Briggs's reply came sharp and deliberate. "Then listen carefully. I want a full sweep. No witnesses, no debris. Erase the entire Mercer family if necessary. I repeat, no survivors." Jack froze, every word burning into him. For a long moment, all he could hear was the faint hum of the signal and the wind clawing at the trees. Behind him, Scout growled, a deep trembling sound unlike anything Jack had heard from him since Afghanistan. The dog's hackles rose, his body stiff, as if recognizing that voice too. Jack turned off the phone and held it tight, his jaw set. "He knows we're here," he said quietly, "and he's coming for us." Carter's eyes were grim. "Then we'd better be ready when he gets here." Jack looked down at the valley where the Ironvale trucks idled, men moving like ants in the headlights. Somewhere among them, his brother was bound, surrounded by soldiers who followed orders without question. Scout pressed against Jack's leg, warm and steady in the cold. The old dog looked up, eyes gleaming with something between loyalty and warning. Jack exhaled slowly, the fog of his breath drifting into the night. "We'll get him back," he said softly, almost a promise. "But first, we end this trail before it reaches our doorstep." The mountain was burning with silence before the first shot ever came. Jack Mercer and his small band reached the ruins of Echo Ridge just before dawn, their bodies stiff from the climb, their breaths white in the air. The old observation post stood like a scar against the snow, its roof half-caved, its radio tower leaning. It had once been a lookout for wildfires, irony sharp as ice now. Lily and Carter stumbled into the cabin's shell while Jack and Ray secured the perimeter. Scout moved without sound, nose to the ground, weaving between the ruins as if remembering a place from another life. "They'll be here soon," Ray said, his voice low, eyes scanning the distant valley. Smoke already rose below the convoy, closing in. Jack nodded. "We hold them here. No one crosses this ridge." Inside, Carter was laying out what ammunition they had, left a handful of old rifle rounds, 2 flares, and 3 boxes of blanks from a training crate found in the shed. "Not much to fight a company," he said grimly. "We'll make it enough," Jack replied. He moved to the window slit and sighted through the cold air. The first truck was crawling up the narrow path, its tires kicking snow into a mist. "They're using the upper road," Ray said. "That path runs right under the ridge wall. If we hit them, their debris will block the climb." Jack thought for a moment, then turned to Carter. "You still have that tripwire kit?" Carter nodded, pulling out the spool of cable from his rucksack. "Scout can run it faster than we can," Jack said, looking down at the dog who sat poised at his feet. He tied one end of the wire around a broken support beam, then clipped the other to Scout's harness. "Take it to the pine edge," he whispered. "Pull when you hear me call." Scout's ears flicked. He understood. The dog dashed through the snow, weaving between trees, the wire snaking behind him like silver thread. When he disappeared into the fog, Jack turned to the others. "When the first truck passes the curve, we light the flares. Ray, you cover the flank. Carter, you watch the rear." Lily looked at her father, face pale but determined. "What about me?" she asked. Jack pressed a flashlight into her hand. "You stay near the radio. If the signal clears, call anyone who'll listen." She nodded. Moments later, a low rumble grew into a growl as engines echoed through the valley. Headlights sliced through the mist. The convoy was close, too close. Jack crouched behind the ridge wall, heart-steady eyes fixed. "Wait," he whispered. The first truck turned the corner, its armored grille inches from the ledge. Now he shouted. Carter fired a flare gun. The red light streaked across the sky, bursting into fire that painted the snow in blood-colored glow. Scout yanked the trip line. The wire snapped tight, triggering a row of salvaged grenades they'd buried under the drift. The explosion split the air like thunder. Snow and flame erupted, swallowing the lead vehicle. The second truck swerved, grinding into the rock face. Soldiers poured out, shouting orders over the roar. Jack fired twice, taking cover behind the old tower base. Carter returned fire, the muzzle flashes bright in the haze. Ray broke from cover, moving down the slope to flank. Scout darted between bursts of smoke, carrying another line of cable to the far side. Jack could see his shape blurred ghostly, like a living ember racing through the firelight. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "Almost there." A second explosion cracked the ridge, shaking loose chunks of ice. The soldiers were regrouping, forming a firing line. Then from behind them, a roar of an engine ripped through the chaos. Ray was in the driver's seat of the mobile incinerator, its cabin glowing orange from the flames licking beneath. Jack shouted, but the wind tore the sound away. Ray's face was calm, almost peaceful. He steered the truck toward the edge of the cliff where the remaining Iron Veil men had taken position. Ray Jack's voice broke. "Get out of there!" But his brother only looked up once, the faintest smile crossing his lips. The vehicle gained speed, tires spinning on ice. A shot shattered the windshield, but Ray didn't flinch. The truck hit the edge and kept going. The ground trembled as it plunged into the gorge, exploding in a bloom of fire that rolled upward like a sunrise. Jack dropped to his knees, the shock wave washing over him. The sky turned to light for a breath, then back to black smoke. Scout lay a few yards away, half buried in snow. His fur singed, one paw twisted under him. Jack crawled to him, voice trembling. "Scout." "Hey, stay with me, buddy." The dog's eyes fluttered open. He tried to lift his head but couldn't. Jack pulled him close, shielding him as debris rained down. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved us." Carter stumbled toward them, limping face streaked with soot. "The others are gone," he said. "The blast took them all." Jack nodded numbly, eyes fixed on the burning ravine. Ray's gone too. The flames below cast long shadows up the ridge, and for a moment Jack could almost see his brother's silhouette in the light, standing tall, hand raised in farewell. Then it faded, leaving only smoke curling into the dawn. They pulled back to the tower, dragging Scout between them. Lily met them at the door, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Dad," she whispered. The radio cleared for a second. "I got a signal through to State Command." "Good," Jack said hoarsely. "Tell them what happened. All of it." He set Scout down near the stove and tore open his pack for bandages. The dog whimpered softly as he wrapped the paw. "Easy," Jack murmured. "You're still here. That's all that matters." The radio crackled suddenly. A voice came through, faint but clear. "This is Colonel Briggs. Report." Jack froze, glancing at Carter, who mouthed silently, "Don't answer." But then another voice followed, one that made Jack's blood turn to ice. "This is Lieutenant Briggs," it said. "Calm, youthful, commanding. Convoy is down. All assets lost. Proceeding to secondary objective." Jack's eyes widened. "His son?" he breathed. Carter stared at him. "You mean—" Jack nodded slowly. "The one running the convoy. Briggs's son." The truth struck like a blow. That was why Briggs had buried everything. Not to protect a company, but to protect blood. The radio hissed again before going silent. Jack looked down at Scout, who stirred weakly and gave a low growl as if he too recognized the voice that had nearly ended them. Jack rested a hand on his neck. "Yeah," he whispered. "I remember it too." Outside, the flames from the gorge had begun to fade, painting the snow in a dull orange glow. Dawn crept over Echo Ridge at last, soft and fragile, carrying the promise of survival and the ache of loss. The forest had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that remembers everything. The fire at Echo Ridge smoldered long into the morning, the air thick with the bitter tang of burned metal and pine. Smoke coiled through the valley like ghosts reluctant to leave. Jack Mercer moved through the wreckage with the mechanical calm of a man too tired to feel. His jacket was torn, his hands scraped raw, but he didn't stop. He stepped carefully over twisted steel and charred wood until he reached the edge of the gorge where the wreck of the incinerator truck lay in broken pieces hundreds of feet below. The wind carried the faint hiss of cooling fire. Somewhere in that ruin lay his brother. Carter joined him, his limp more pronounced now. "They're gone," he said quietly. "No movement down there for an hour." Jack nodded through the confirmation hurt. "He saved us," he said. "He always thought he'd never make it right, but he did." Carter didn't answer. There was nothing to add that didn't sound small. Behind them, Lily tended to Scout inside what remained of the tower. The dog rested on a torn blanket, his bandaged paw trembling slightly when the wind shifted. His eyes followed Jack every time he moved. As the sun broke over the ridge, a flicker of silver caught Jack's eye. He crouched by the scorched ground near the cliff's edge and brushed away ash until something hard clinked beneath his glove. It was a small flash drive, the metal casing blackened but intact. He turned it over and saw the faint engraving near the base iron veil. Internal Operations. His breath caught. Ray must have slipped it to him before climbing into that truck. The last act of a man trying to finish what he started. Jack wiped the drive clean and held it in his palm, the weight of it heavy as a promise. Carter leaned closer. "What's on it?" "Proof," Jack said softly. "Ray said Briggs's name was on the contracts. If this holds what I think it does, it's more than proof. It's their entire trail." Carter nodded slowly. "Then guard it with your life, because they'll come for it." Scout stirred at the sound of voices and limped toward them, his paw leaving faint impressions in the soot. He pressed his head against Jack's knee, and for a moment the simple gesture broke through the hardness in Jack's chest. "Good boy," he whispered, resting a hand on Scout's neck. "He would have wanted you to keep watching over us." The dog gave a low whine and nudged Jack's hand toward the flash drive as if urging him to move. By midday, the storm of engines came again this time, not iron veils, but the deep thrum of government vehicles. Black SUVs wound their way up the ridge road, tires crunching over frozen ground. A dozen agents fanned out in black parkas marked with white block letters, Federal Task Unit. The lead man, a tall figure with gray hair and steady eyes, approached Jack. "Special Agent Donovan," he introduced himself, flashing a badge. "We picked up your distress call. Looks like you've been busy." Jack studied him carefully before answering. "You're late." Donovan's expression didn't change. "In these mountains, late's the only way we come." His eyes swept over the ruined trucks, the burned clearing, the cratered road. "Where's the rest of them?" "Gone," Jack said simply. "One of them was Ray Mercer, my brother." He stopped the incinerator from reaching the tower. Donovan nodded once, the kind of gesture that carried both respect and distance. "We'll need statements from everyone," he said, "and whatever evidence you have." Jack hesitated, then pulled the flash drive from his pocket. "This is all that's left," he said. Donovan took it carefully, turning it in his gloved hand. "You realize what you're holding, right? This isn't just corporate fraud. It's federal-level conspiracy." "I know," Jack said. "My brother died proving it." For a long moment, Donovan just looked at him, as if weighing something unseen. Then he lowered his voice. "Listen, Mr. Mercer. What you found here, it's going to make noise. And when it does, some of that noise will vanish before it reaches daylight." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean part of this evidence will disappear into files marked classified," Donovan said quietly. "People higher than me will decide how much truth the public can stand. If you want it all to survive, make a copy. Keep it somewhere safe." Jack's gaze hardened. "You're telling me to break the chain of custody." "I'm telling you to keep faith with the dead," Donovan replied. "Because sometimes justice and the law don't walk the same path." He handed the drive back. "You never got this from me." Then he turned and began issuing orders to his team, who moved with quiet efficiency, photographing bagging evidence, marking tire tracks in the snow. Jack slipped the drive into an empty cartridge case and tucked it inside his coat. The metal was cold against his chest. Scout watched him the whole time, tail thumping faintly against the floor. Lily came to his side, her face pale but resolute. "Is it over?" she asked. Jack looked at the burning horizon. "Not yet," he said. "But we have something they can't bury this time." Later that afternoon, while the agents loaded debris into trucks, Jack found a moment alone. He walked to the edge of the ridge again, where the light from the sun spilled over the snow like fire turned soft. Scout followed, sitting beside him. Jack crouched, brushing his hand over the dog's fur. He was scared, Jack said quietly, speaking more to himself than to anyone. But he went anyway. That's what courage is. Scout gave a small sound, a whine gentle and low, then rested his head on Jack's shoulder. As they sat there, one of the agents called out, "Sir, We found a body north side of the wreckage. Jack turned sharply. 2 men were hauling up a stretcher from the gorge. The body was burned, but still recognizable by the metal tag around the neck. Jack stepped closer, breath catching when he saw the insignia on the jacket. It wasn't Ray. It was Lieutenant Briggs, the colonel's son. For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. Carter joined him, exhaling slowly. "So that's why he hid it," Carter murmured. He wasn't protecting Iron Vale. He was protecting his own blood. Jack looked down at the still face, the firelight flickering across the ruined insignia. "Then it ends with him," he said. "No more cover-ups." The words sounded firm, but inside he knew better. For every secret buried another waited beneath. Scout stood beside him, ears tilted toward the whisper of wind that moved through the pines as if hearing voices carried from the valley below. By evening, the federal convoy began to roll out, leaving only silence and smoke behind. Donovan stopped by Jack's truck before departing. "Take care of yourself, Ranger," he said. "You did good here. But if I were you, I'd keep an eye on that dog. He seems to know when the world's about to shift." Jack managed a tired smile. He always has. As the agents disappeared down the road, Jack climbed into his own vehicle. Scout settled beside him, head on his knee. The flash drive was still tucked close to his heart, small but heavy, the last piece of a story no one wanted told. The horizon glowed faintly red where the fires had been the color of both ending and beginning. Scout gave a single soft bark, his amber eyes fixed ahead on the road that curved toward home. Winter faded slowly that year, as if reluctant to loosen its grip on the mountains. By the time the last snow melted from the pines of Aspen Ridge, the world below had already moved on. News reports called it the Iron Vale scandal, though few knew the full story. They said Colonel Briggs had been sentenced to federal prison for contract corruption for falsifying military waste disposal records for the deaths of unnamed contractors under his command. The words sounded clinical, almost merciful compared to what Jack Mercer knew. There was no mention of Echo Ridge, or of Ray, or of how close the forest had come to burning to ash. The truth had been buried again, this time beneath paperwork and silence. Jack read the verdict in the small-town newspaper while sitting on his porch, Scout's head resting on his boot. The old dog had healed well, though a faint limp remained in his front leg. Lily sat nearby, painting the mountains across the valley with careful strokes of green and gold the way she remembered them before the fire. The air smelled of thawed earth and pine sap. "So, that's it," she asked quietly, nodding toward the folded paper in Jack's hands. "He walks away with 10 years for stealing money." Jack folded the page and slipped it aside. "He lost more than money, he said. That's punishment enough even if the court won't admit it." A week later, a plain envelope arrived in the ranger station mailbox, unmarked except for his name written in a hand he didn't recognize. Inside was a small velvet box and a single sheet of paper. The medal inside was the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism, its ribbon a strip of deep red and blue. The letter that accompanied it was typed unsigned except for one faint signature at the bottom, Briggs C.O. The message was short. To Corporal Nathan Carter, for valor above and beyond duty. You deserved more than you were given. May this serve as a debt repaid. Beneath it in handwriting more uneven than the rest were 4 words, Forgive a soldier's sins. Jack stared at the letter for a long time, the words blurring slightly in his vision. When he finally handed it to Carter later that afternoon, the Marine said nothing. He just stood by the open door medal glinting faintly in his rough hands and nodded once. "Guess even the guilty can remember how to salute Carter," said softly. "He was wrong about many things, but not about us. We don't quit." Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. "No," he said quietly. "We don't." By spring, the mountains had changed. The charred slopes of Echo Ridge were sprouting with new life sprigs of pine fragile wildflowers. grass trembling under the meltwater. It was Lily's idea to go back. "He deserves to rest where he stood," she said one morning, packing a small tin of ashes and a thermos of coffee. Carter agreed, and Scout wagged his tail as if in understanding. They left at dawn, climbing the familiar trail under skies the color of clear steel. The air was cold, but kind, the wind carrying the scent of rain and earth instead of smoke. The path wound upward in silence except for the crunch of boots and the soft pant of Scout. When they reached the ridge, Jack paused. The tower still stood half-ruined, its metal frame rusted to a dull orange. Around it, the ground had healed in patches green moss creeping over old scars. Lily set down the tin and knelt brushing snowmelt from a flat stone. "This will do," she whispered. Jack nodded. Carter opened the tin and carefully poured the ashes into the wind. They scattered in a gray ribbon that caught the light like dusted silver before vanishing into the forest below. No one spoke for a long while. Then Scout moved. The dog walked to a spot near the tower's base, nose low, tail still. He began pawing at the ground, slow and deliberate. "What have you got, boy?" Jack asked, stepping closer. Scout kept digging until his claws struck metal. Jack knelt and brushed away the damp earth. A small tin box lay there, rusted edges eaten by time. He pried it open. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, was a dog tag, his own, the one he'd lost years ago during a blizzard rescue that had nearly claimed him. The name was faint, but still there, Mercer J. For a moment, Jack couldn't breathe. Lily's voice was soft behind him. "He found you," she said. Jack turned the tag over in his palm, the metal warm from his touch. "No," he murmured. "He found what we left behind." Carter looked out over the valley, the wind tugging at his jacket. "Maybe that's how it works," he said. "We spend our lives losing pieces of ourselves, and the mountain keeps them safe until we're ready to come back." Jack closed his hand around the tag and smiled faintly. "Then it's time to take it home." He stood the tag clinking softly in his fist. "We keep the light, son," he said under his breath. Voice steady, the way he used to speak to Ray when they were boys, sharing promises under the same stars. "No matter how dark it gets, we keep the light." The wind answered him gentle and cold, threading through the pines like a song older than any of them. Scout lifted his head, ears pricking toward the sound. His eyes caught the sunlight, amber flecked with gold, and for an instant they looked young again. They stayed on the ridge until the sun began to sink, turning the snow to silver fire. Carter left the medal pinned to the tower post, its ribbon fluttering beside the ashes. Lily took one last photo of the four of them. 2 soldiers, 1 girl and a dog standing against the endless blue. Then they started down, leaving footprints that would fade by morning. Halfway down the trail, Scout stopped and turned back toward the ridge. Jack paused beside him, following his gaze. The tower stood small against the horizon, the last rays of sun glinting off the metal. The forest below shimmered with life, returning whispering softly in the breeze. Jack reached down and scratched behind Scout's ears. "It's over now," he said quietly. "You did your part." The dog looked up, tail thumping once, slow and certain. As they walked the last stretch home, the air grew warm with spring. Birds called across the valley, and the sound of thawing streams filled the silence. For the first time in months, Jack felt something ease inside him, not victory, not peace exactly, but a kind of acceptance. Some battles didn't end in triumph. They ended in survival. And sometimes that was enough. When they reached the outpost, the first stars had appeared. Jack hung the recovered dog tag beside Scout's collar by the door, where it would catch the morning light. For those who didn't make it back, he said. Scout curled beside the stove, eyes half closed, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of pine and rain. The world had begun again. And that was the story of Echo Ridge, a tale of courage, loyalty, and the light that never fades even after the storm. What do you think about Jack's choice at the end? Do you believe Scout knew the truth all along? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me where you're watching from and what part stayed with you most. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story of honor, redemption, and the quiet heroes who still walk among us.